Hello friends, welcome to another theoretical lecture on non-ferrous metallography and characterization techniques. The reason we consider the theoretical aspect of the material that we are supposed to deal with in this practical course is because it is important for us to know what is the application that these materials will be used in, what are the microstructures that render the appropriate property so that these materials can be used in that particular applications. So to give that theoretical backup, we have these lectures. Now we will be following the format that we have so far keeping up with. That is, we will be starting up with some sort of an historical perspective. The historical perspective is important because it helps us know where it all began and where we stand. And we will build on it and we will get into different alloys and see what are their characteristic microstructures. So in this lecture, what we will be focusing on is magnesium and its alloys. Now, when you compare magnesium to copper, we saw that copper, we have been using it, say, from 7000 BC onwards. So we saw that archaeologists found few beads on pins that were made of copper that in the era that was related to or that is usually associated with 7000 BC. Now, in relation or in comparison to copper, magnesium is very much new because the industrial scale production of magnesium or the usage of magnesium, so to speak, began in the early years of 20th century. So it's just over a century or so that we have been producing the industrial scale or on the industrial level the magnesium, and we have been using it. So in that sense, magnesium and aluminium, they stand at the same stage. So like aluminium, magnesium is also was produced, or the industrial scale production began in the early years of 20th century. Now, when you want to consider the first known usage of magnesium, it has a wonderful story to back it up. So this first known usage of magnesium compound was in the form of a salt. Like I said earlier, this usage of magnesium was an accidental discovery and it has a wonderful story to it. So the year was 1618. In this year, the UK or the United Kingdom as we know it was facing a severe drought, and in the place called Epsom, there was a farmer who had several cattle with him, and when he tried to feed and water his cattle, he could not find a fresh water source, and therefore he was forced to use a water source that he usually ignored because the water there was rather bitter. So because of this drought in this year 1618, he was forced to use a particular water source wherein the water was bitter, and instead of he and his family using it, he began testing by watering or feeding that water to his cattle. Initially, the cattle did not prefer that water, but because of the drought, they were forced to use it, and despite the bitterness, they started using it. And what he found was, to his surprise, whatever injuries that cattle had on them, whatever infirmities on the skin that cattle had on them, after using this water, they started to disappear, or it started to heal. And when he realized that, and the word spread, and he himself and his family started using that water, and they also realized that this water has some medicinal value, the word started to spread, and some researchers came by and they identified that this water had a sufficient concentration or very high concentration of Epsom salt or magnesium sulfate, and this magnesium sulfate or this salt they referred to as the Epsom salt because that was the place wherein this farmer Henry Vicker and his family along with his cattle were living, and this was the first source of this particular magnesium sulfate or Epsom salt, which is even used today for its medicinal value. So the first usage of magnesium was in the form of the Epsom salt for its medicinal value. So having discovered that, or having discovered this particular salt involving this particular non-ferrous material was of medicinal value, the discovery of it, the extraction of it, or the first separation of it from its salt form happened in the year 1755. So it is more than 100 years after, Joseph Black was the first one to separate magnesium from its salt. Now, the source or the mineral that he used to separate magnesium from was not Epsom salt. It was something that was referred to as magnesia alba. Now, magnesia alba was a compound that was known to us even before Epsom salt. However, this was not a compound that was of any use to us. This was largely used by alchemists, like people who practice alchemy. I don't know how many of you know the term alchemy, but there were some group of people who wanted to convert base metals to noble metal. Like you would have heard of stories like alchemists wanted to create gold out of some other elements, but the way they approached it was they wanted to create a non-reactive material, or they wanted to transform a reactive material to a non-reactive material, that is a base metal to a noble metal. In this process, they used something called as magnesium alba. They didn't know what it was, but they knew that it was rather silver-like in appearance, and it came from a place called Magnesia in Thessaly state of Greece. So, since this particular silver-like material came from a place called Magnesia in Thessaly of Greece, they named it as magnesia alba, and this was known to Joseph Black, and he used magnesia alba and he separated the first magnesium ever known to us. And after this separation, little over 50 years after, Humphrey Davy came by it, and as we know, Humphrey Davy was the one who separated aluminium, and he worked extensively on separating the elements from their salt or compound form using electrolysis, and he took a similar approach and he separated the magnesium from magnesia alba, and he was the first one to give the name magnesium. Now, this name magnesium, again it comes from the term, or is the material that was used by Joseph Black, magnesia alba, and therefore we have this name magnesium. Now, as you can see in the script here, that Humphrey Davy did not want to use the term magnesium because it was synonymous to manganese and he did not want to confuse. In order to avoid that confusion, he stated the name magnium. However, despite his suggestion, the name magnesium started to pick up, and as if you could recollect, EM, the term was often used by Humphrey Davy, and the magnesium along with other of his discoveries like aluminium, sodium, the magnesium also got up, the name magnesium got up. The industrial scale production, or an approach for the industrial scale production of magnesium, it came from Robert Benson after, say, close to 50 years after the initial separation of magnesium by Humphrey Davy. After 50 years, Robert Benson found an approach that was relatively easy to produce magnesium or to extract magnesium, and we have several development after that, and it was a Canadian professor who gave us the Pigeon process that we now use for the extraction of magnesium from its ore. So, this is the theoretical background of or rather the historical perspective of the way we started using magnesium, or the way the magnesium was extracted from its ore, or the way the magnesium was brought to us. Now, when you talk about designation of the magnesium alloy, when you compare it to other alloys, it's fairly easy, because the magnesium alloys are rather designated by, for some alloying elements, it is designated by considering the first letter of that word. For instance, when you see a magnesium alloy with a term A in it, then you can relate it to aluminium. So that means it is an magnesium alloy comprising of aluminium. When you see B, then it is an alloy comprising of bismuth, and C, then alloy comprising of copper. So on it goes for lithium, manganese, nickel, silicon, tin, and zinc. For these set of alloying elements, the first word or the first letter of their name, when it is included in the designation of alloy, then it means that these are the alloying elements present in them. So if you see an designation involving T, you can right away state that this is a magnesium alloy involving tin. So for these set of alloying elements, it is easy for us to understand from the designation what the alloy comprises of. However, there are other set of alloying elements wherein the first letter of their name do not often match with the designation that is involved. For instance, we have cadmium and the designation for it is D. So when you have a magnesium alloy involving cadmium, it will not have C, but because it overlaps with copper, but we rather have D. And for rare earth elements, or the alloy made up of rare earth elements, we have E. Iron is fairly straightforward to remember, we have ferrite, so F. So these are other set of alloying elements wherein the first letter of their word do not match with the designation. So it includes zirconium, lead. Maybe lead is easy for us to understand because we know its name to be plumbum, so P, and we have silver, chromium and calcium. So we have two sets of alloying elements. For one set of alloying elements, the designation is easy for us to relate it to the first letter of the alloying element. However, for the other set of alloying elements, the designation and its name quite vary. So if you want to see some examples, so these are some examples of the magnesium alloy, and as you can see, the designation for one alloy begins with AZ and some numbers. So AZ, it means it comprises of aluminium and zinc, and depending on the composition we have some numbers that follows. So when you have such a designation, you can not only find the alloying elements but also the amount of alloying elements that is present in this alloy. So one example is AZ, the other is MD. It comprises of then manganese and cadmium. The other is ZQ, zinc and silver. So based on the succeeding or subsequent numbers that are involved in the designation, you will be able to understand what are the amount or the concentration of each of these alloying elements in the alloy or the magnesium alloy that we are considering. So this is the designation that is adapted to express the alloy of magnesium. Now when you want to consider the properties that affect the metallographic techniques that we undertake for magnesium, is one of the critical property that affects the metallographic technique is the low hardness. However, low hardness is not something new to us, because low hardness we also saw in lead and some other soft materials, soft non-ferrous materials. But magnesium is quite unique because if you see the crystal structure of magnesium, it is not a cubic based one, but rather it's CP. It's hexagonal close packed crystal structure. So that means because of this low hardness, when you impose some sort of a deformation while you are mechanically polishing it, you are not introducing a dislocation, but you are introducing a twin. So what difference a dislocation would or a twin would make with respect to the dislocation is that when you have a dislocation formed in the microstructure, you won't be able to see any change in the microstructure. Supposing you have a microstructure, you take say for example EBSD of it, or you polish it and view the microstructure after you have sufficiently deformed it through plastic deformation, through the nucleation and growth of dislocation, there won't be much of a change that you would see visually. Of course, the energy of the system would have increased, of course the lattice parameters would have changed, but just at the two-dimensional microstructure, you won't be able to see much when it is being deformed by dislocations, when you have made some distortions by dislocation. However, when twins are introduced because of the deformation, because of the softness of the material, now when you mechanically polish it and owing to its crystal structure you have the formation of twins. Since twins have their own crystallographic orientation, the overall microstructure would get distorted. You would have formation of certain sub-boundaries, you would be able to see the twin boundaries, and because they have different orientations, they etch in a different way. So all these things would distort your overall microstructure. Particularly when you do an EBSD microstructure or a microstructure and technique, you would adapt a technique wherein the disparity between the grains are based on the crystallographic orientation, then you would be able to see clearly a separate region within the grain which was not a part of the processing technique, but it was introduced by the polishing technique. So you process a material, you want to see its microstructure, and while preparing this microstructure, you polished it in such a way that you had a twin introduced into the microstructure. Now when you look at this microstructure, focusing on the crystallographic orientation, in addition to the microstructure that the processing technique yields, you would be able to see the twins introduced by the polishing, because these twins have their own crystallographic orientation. So the softness of the material or low hardness of magnesium is very critical because of the twins that they introduce during mechanical polishing. So it is very critical when you compare it to other, say FCC based materials, wherein the distortion that is introduced would not much deform the crystal, or would not much bring about a change in the microstructure, like the twins, how they would introduce a new crystallographic orientation in the microstructure. So in addition to the low hardness, magnesium and its alloys are also highly sensitive to water. So you cannot then use water for washing the surface. So once you polish your magnesium, you cannot use water to polish the surface, to clean the surface, or you cannot use water to cool your sample while you are polishing it, or you cannot also use it as a lubricant. So when you are working on magnesium, particularly for viewing its microstructure, so in a metallography lab, when you are working on magnesium, the amount of water which you or the use of water which you usually adopt for other materials, say aluminium or some other, say iron, will not be appropriate for magnesium. And in case of magnesium, you cannot use water in any of the techniques. You cannot use water for washing. Like I said, you cannot use it in any form, because that would corrode your surface which you have polished. Now, these two aspects or these two properties should be in our mind when we are working on magnesium and its alloys. One is low hardness, and once you impose some force on it, then you would introduce twins that will distort the crystallographic orientation of your grain, and that will become visible when the microstructure. The second is usage of water. In no form it should be allowed, because it will corrode your surface, particularly the polished surface will get easily corroded, and all your efforts in polishing it will go waste. Now, these are the factors or properties that we need to mind when we are working on magnesium in the metallographic lab. Now, even though in the initial stages of the production of magnesium, it did not catch up like aluminium, because it had to compete with aluminium for the marketplace. When you compare magnesium with aluminium is corrosion resistant, because if you could recollect your course on non-ferrous materials, aluminium would form an oxide layer that would prevent the corrosion of the subsequent layers. So this is, we refer to it as passivation. However, in case of magnesium, we don't have such layers, and as we have seen, it is very much sensitive to water. So the atmosphere we have consists of moistures, and also it is sensitive to other elements that are available in the atmosphere. So because of this corrosive nature, the use of magnesium did not initially caught up. So people had to wait, and we had to form magnesium or produce magnesium in such a way that it was corrosive resistant for it to be available for us on the industrial scale. So initial development was rather gradual. However, once we were able to produce a magnesium alloy that was corrosive resistant, then large components began to be made using this magnesium alloy, because like aluminium or even more than aluminium, magnesium or the strength to weight magnesium ratio of magnesium alloy was quite larger. So when you compare this ratio or this property of a material, that is strength to weight ratio, the magnesium and its alloy, they offered a very good strength to weight ratio when you compare it with the other metals. And therefore large scale components were being produced from the stages when we were able to produce, or when we were able to process a corrosive resistant magnesium alloy. And these large components, then when they were being produced, they formed certain defects during their processing, and the first etching efforts was not on the microscopic scale but rather on the macroscopic scale, in order to see the macroscopic defects that were formed during the processing techniques. So this etching technique, or the etchings involved for this macro etchings were, or the etchants that we still use for the macro etching of magnesium alloys, are acetic and picric acid. So the combination of acetic and picric acid along with ethanol, in order to dilute the concentration of acetic and picric acid, we cannot use water, because again the magnesium alloy is sensitive to water. So in the place of water we use ethanol. So these combinations of etchants, or these combinations of acids, are used as etchants to identify or to show some contrast in the defects, or the defects that are formed during the processing techniques. So when you have a macroscopic defects, in order to establish a contrast so that it becomes visible for us through our naked eye, we use these combinations of acids and ethanol to dilute the solution. So the first etching or the observation of magnesium alloys, the macroscopic observation, the etchants involved are acetic acid, picric acid, in combination with ethanol, which is used to dilute the overall the concentration of these acids. Now when you come for the microscopic observation, the etchants vary depending on the alloy that we want to see. So let us begin by considering the different or the critical alloys of magnesium. So one critical alloy of magnesium is the combination of magnesium and aluminium, and the introduction of aluminium improves the mechanical properties of the magnesium. So you already have magnesium that provides a good strength to weight ratio, and if you want to enhance its mechanical properties even further, you add aluminium to it. Now because of its strength to weight ratio, this combination of magnesium and aluminium is used in automotive applications, because as you know, we want to arrive at or we want to use a material in the automotive industry which will consume the less amount of the resources that we feed into it and give us most efficiency. So that for that reason, magnesium and aluminium, the combination of an alloy involving aluminium or magnesium and aluminium, is used in the automotive application. So if you want to etch this alloy of magnesium and aluminium, the etchant would involve acetic glycol. And this acetic glycol, when you use this etchant to visualize or to bring about the contrast in the magnesium aluminium alloy microstructure, then this is how it would look like. In case of this magnesium aluminium alloy, the solubility of aluminium is to such an extent that you won't be having any new precipitates forming. All the phases will be homogeneous, and all the contrast that we could see comes from the grain boundaries alone. And that is one of the reason why when people want to study the magnesium aluminium alloy, they go for a projection or they go for a microstructural representation wherein the grains are differentiated based on their orientation. So even though as of now we are talking about the optical microscope wherein the contrast just comes from the grain boundaries, for deeper investigation people would want to differentiate each grains based on their orientation, and one of the ways to do it would be EBSD technique. So this is how a typical microstructure of the magnesium aluminium alloy would look like. And if you want to get back to its designation, since aluminium is one of the alloying elements wherein the designation is relatable to its name, so A would be the designation involved for these alloys, and this is how its microstructure would look like, and the etchant that we use is acetic glycol. Now the other alloying element that is extensively added to magnesium to improve its property is zinc. Zinc enhances the high temperature resistance of magnesium, high temperature failure resistance of the magnesium, and it also improves its corrosion resistance. So it caters in both high temperature case and also the corrosive nature of the magnesium. Now because of this properties or because of this enhanced properties, the magnesium zinc alloy is employed in medical implants. There are several applications for magnesium zinc alloy, but one of the characteristic application is the medical implants. Now the way we would etch this alloy of magnesium and zinc is by using hydrofluoric acid and water, and in this case the water is permissible because of the nature of the other etchant, that is the hydrofluoric acid. So since hydrofluoric acid is able to overcome this corrosive nature of water, we can use this combination. Now one critical thing that you have to note is that this micrograph here that you see is from a published journal. So as you can see here, this is from a published journal. However, when you submit this sort of a microstructure for your thesis work, nobody in our department will be ready to accept it. They would want you to repolish it and get a micrograph that is free of surface cracks. Even in our department, if people are not ready to accept your micrograph something like this with surface cracks, the reason an established journal accepts it because of the nature of magnesium. So people who have worked on magnesium, only they know what is the difficulty involved in polishing magnesium, or the steps that you have to take, how careful you should be. I can personally tell you because my master thesis was it involved magnesium, and I worked on it in one of the established labs in the world. It was of course it was not in India, I'm sorry to say, but I worked on it in an established lab, and by duration of my project was say 7 months, and I spent 5 months in polishing my sample. This was given, I was provided all the best metallography techniques and the apparatus that was required. In spite of all these best options that was given to me, I took the 5 of the 7 months that I had just to perfect how to polish the magnesium alloys. So that much difficult is polishing the magnesium alloy, and that is the reason why, even though your surface might have some cracks or visible surface defects, people are ready to accept it and they are ready to publish it, provided you are able to get across the point that you wanted to make through your investigation. So that is the reason why you should not be surprised when you see such microstructures in the established journals, wherein you see surface scratches, which we will not in this department would agree. So that is one uniqueness of magnesium, and that is one concession that you could get on working with magnesium and its alloys. Now, in addition to this particular magnesium zinc alloy, there is also another alloy that is quickly gaining ground nowadays, that is magnesium lithium alloy. So the magnesium lithium alloy, like that of aluminium, the lithium also improves the mechanical properties of magnesium. Particularly, it improves the ductility and formability of the magnesium alloy or the magnesium. Now, when you improve the formability of the magnesium, then it would be possible for you to make different sort of components of intricate shapes. So by virtue of including lithium, you are allowed to work extensively on magnesium and make intricate shape out of it. Then you could form, or you can extensively make some ultralight components out of it. So ultralight nature comes from magnesium, and the components of it, the intricate components, are allowed to be made by the inclusion of lithium to it. Now, when you want to polish or when you want to suitably etch this magnesium lithium alloy, you have to have the combination of acetic and picric acid. So when you have this combination of etchants, then you would be able to visualize the magnesium lithium alloy. Now, the point that you need to understand is that in the previous 2 cases, when you introduced as the alloying elements aluminium and zinc, mostly the microstructure would comprise of a single phase. However, when you include lithium, you would have 2 distinct phases. One is the alpha magnesium grain, wherein you would find traces of lithium, and a lithium rich intermetallic. The lithium rich intermetallic will corrode faster, and that's the reason why you see it in the darker region, whereas relatively the alpha magnesium grain would corrode slowly for this combination of etchant, and that is the reason why you see it in a lighter note. So this is another important alloy of magnesium. So the final alloy that we will be considering in this lecture is the combination of magnesium and rare earth elements. So there are several rare earth elements, but in case of magnesium, the 2 widely used ones are cerium and lanthanum. So we use along with magnesium, we use several rare earth elements, and the most commonly used are cerium and lanthanum. And in these combination of rare earth elements and magnesium they improve the corrosion resistance of the material, and they are then subsequently used for both automotive and bio implants. So in addition to the cerium and lanthanum, there are several other rare earth elements that are being used as an alloying element for magnesium, and largely their role is to improve the mechanical and also corrosion properties of the bulk or the base metal, that is magnesium. Now, when you look into the microstructure of the combination of magnesium and rare earth elements, what you see here is the alloy of magnesium and cerium. Now, of course, based on the rare earth metal that you include as the alloying element, your etchant type would vary. For magnesium and cerium, and for also it has been observed that for other rare earth elements, this combination of etchant can be used, that is the combination of glycol and nitric acid. When you combine these 2, this combination, just by varying the proportion of nitric acid, you would be able to etch almost most of the alloys of magnesium and rare earth. And the combination or the inclusion of the rare earth element into the matrix of magnesium would form, as we see here, an alpha magnesium grain and some intermetallics, and these intermetallics, they form along the grain boundaries, and these intermetallics are usually the eutectic product, and they form along the grain boundaries. And depending on the difference, because of the difference in their reactivities, as you can see, when compared to the intermetallics formed which is rich in cerium, this intermetallics is it has a corrosion rate that is lower than that of magnesium, and that's the reason why you see it in the brighter spectrum. So these are the different magnesium alloys that, and also the alloys that are introduced, or the alloying elements that are introduced in the magnesium to enhance largely its mechanical properties, high temperature resistant and corrosion resistance. So these are the major alloying elements that are involved in the production of magnesium alloys, and we have seen in the 4 alloys that we have seen, 2 of these alloys largely produce a single phase system, while the other 2 produces a system with a significant amount of alpha magnesium grain and a traces of intermetallics, and there is a significant or considerable difference in the reactivity rate that allows us to visualize the or distinguish the alpha magnesium grains from the intermetallics. So with this, let us wind our discussion on the magnesium alloy, which, even though it is new to us, it is quickly graining ground because of its high strength to weight ratio. So let's see ourselves in the next lecture with another non-ferrous element. Goodbye.